You signed the new terms. Adele, you're a contractor now. No salary, no benefits.
His words hit harder than I expected. At first, I didn't even know what to say. I just stood there, stunned, wondering when I supposedly agreed to give up my salary. I gave that company 17 years, only to find out I'd been working for free the last 6 months. You don't realize how much of yourself you've given until the paycheck doesn't arrive. At first, I thought it was a bank error. These things happen, right? A delay in processing, maybe a Friday landing on a holiday. But when Friday became Monday, and then a full week went by with nothing in my account, I started to feel that old, familiar burn in my gut, the one I used to ignore in my 20s. But at 52, I've learned better. That Monday morning, Denver was wrapped in a soft blanket of snow, the kind that crunches under boots but doesn't stop traffic. I parked in the same spot I had for over a decade, badge clipped to my grey wool coat, thermos in one hand, and a Tupperware of homemade cranberry muffins in the other. I still brought them in every other Monday. It used to be a tradition, back when the team actually gathered around for morning coffee in the break room. Now the break room was mostly empty, overtaken by standing desks and cold brew kegs. I set the muffins down beside the lonely coffee machine. The new kids barely acknowledged it anymore. Everything was protein bars and Slack channels these days. I still believed in face-to-face conversations and hand-signed thank you notes. Maybe that made me a dinosaur in their eyes. Nancy, our receptionist, one of the few left from the old team, offered a warm smile as I passed by. Still spoiling the office. Adele, I grinned. Can't help it. It's Muffin Monday. She leaned closer and lowered her voice. They're changing the lobby wall today. Mason's orders. I paused. The legacy wall. She nodded with a hint of guilt. He wants it to feel more innovative. I didn't say anything, just walked down the hallway, where framed photos of past project teams and community builds lined the walls like silent testaments. My photo was there too, me in a hard hat, clipboard in hand, standing next to the mayor during the groundbreaking of the Colfax Community Center in 2007. By the time I reached my cubicle, Julia, the new assistant Mason hired right out of grad school, was already waiting with a polite but clipped expression. "Hi, Adele," she said, clutching her tablet. "Mr. Telford would like all frame staff photos removed from the lobby area this week." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the photos of the founding teams?" She nodded. "He says they're outdated. We're streamlining the look." Streamlining. That word again. It had become Mason's favorite. Streamline the org chart. Streamline the approval process. Streamline payroll. I let it go. No point pushing back. Not yet. I sat down and logged into the company portal to double-check my paycheck history. I didn't want to make a fuss without knowing the facts. The screen loaded slowly. My hands rested still on the keyboard. Then I saw it. Under employment status, independent internal consultant. Effective May 1st. I blinked. What? I scrolled through my records. My last direct deposit was dated April 28th. Since then, nothing. Just a note that invoices would need to be submitted monthly for payment. Except I had never submitted any invoices. No one told me to, because I wasn't a contractor. I wasn't even notified of a contract change. My breathing slowed, sharpened. I clicked on the digital signature field for the May 1st contract revision. There it was, a green check mark with my name, but I never signed anything. Not digitally, not physically, not even by accident. I walked to HR. Carlos, a junior rep who looked barely 30, tried to keep his tone light. "It looks like you agreed during the system update in Q2. Probably clicked through the new terms when the platform refreshed." "I don't click blindly," I said, keeping my voice even. "Where's the record of me receiving the revised contract?" He shrugged. "Everything is logged, but we'd need a T to pull it." Honestly, Adele, most of the changes were standard. Everyone's status got reviewed when Mason came on board. "So you're saying I lost my salary and benefits by mistake?" He avoided eye contact. "Well, technically you're still working, just in a different capacity, without pay." He winced. "It's not my decision." I left before saying anything I'd regret. Back at my desk, the office buzzed with the usual Monday noise. Phones ringing, keyboards clacking, someone laughing at a meme on a screen. No one noticed as I slowly opened the bottom drawer of my desk, pulled out a USB key, and plugged it into the port hidden behind my monitor. There it was, a folder I'd created years ago during the digital transition, back when I was in charge of contract standardization and database architecture, before they moved my department under operations support. The folder was titled Failsafes. It contained every draft, every version, every single contractual revision I had ever touched timestamped, encrypted, watermarked, and mirrored offline. I opened it, scrolled through the backups, and found the one Mason had edited, the original, my real contract, untouched, Clear terms, full salary, permanent employee status. He thought I wouldn't notice. He thought I was too old, too polite, too slow to keep up. I smiled, leaned back in my chair, and thought, let's see what else you thought I wouldn't notice. I wasn't the kind to make noise, but that didn't mean I couldn't make moves. That night, long after the office lights had dimmed, and the winter wind howled outside the building, I sat in my living room with a cup of chamomile tea and a plan forming in my mind. My cat, Clementine, curled up beside me, warm and indifferent to the human chaos unspooling across payroll spreadsheets. The fail-safes folder hadn't just saved my own contracts, it held versions of every significant vendor agreement, internal promotions, benefit transitions, and executive amendments from the last 10 years, most of which I had quietly archived as backup, while modern systems took over. I wasn't being sneaky, I was being prepared, and now that preparation was going to be my lifeline. The next morning, I arrived at work earlier than usual. The sun had barely crested over the snowy horizon, casting golden stripes through the glass walls of the Stratwell and Crane lobby. Nancy was still hanging her coat when I passed the front desk. "You all right?" she asked, eyes narrowing. "I'm fine," I said with a calm smile. "Just early." She gave a little nod, sensing something she couldn't quite name. At my desk, I opened the log files from the digital contract platform. It took some digging, but eventually, I found the metadata trail. Mason's executive credentials had accessed my employment record on April 29, 36 hours before the supposed quarterly system update Carlos had mentioned. That wasn't coincidence. That was intent. I took screenshots, exported metadata logs, saved everything locally. If I was going to be heard, I needed more than complaints. I needed a clean, traceable story, something any lawyer, compliance officer, or auditor could follow. By mid-morning, I paid a quiet visit to the IT office. Jake, who ran system security, had once been an intern in my department before everything changed. He had a good heart and a better memory. "Jake," I said softly at his desk, "I need a favor." He blinked. "Sure, what's up?" "I need you to confirm whether any logins from my account occurred on April 29th, around 3:15 to May." He hesitated. "That's outside the normal access records." "I know, I just want to be sure." I leaned slightly closer. "Jake, do you remember how I trained you on audit trails back in the day?" His face softened. "Yeah, you said, integrity is what we do when no one's watching, and what we save when someone might be." I smiled. "That's the one." 10 minutes later, Jake came back with the printed report and a quiet whisper. "No access from your credentials, but Mason's login triggered an override on your record that day. You didn't sign anything." That was what I needed. I went back to my desk and printed out the fake contract revision Mason had inserted, then the real one. The original, with my full employment status. Side by side, they told a damning story. I clipped them into a plain manila folder, labeling it review, but I wasn't finished. My instincts told me Mason was playing a bigger game than just saving salary on older employees. So I pulled up the newest high-stakes project, an $18 million bid with the city of Denver for a downtown redevelopment contract. The file had been marked restricted, but since I had previously created the permission tiers in the archive system, I still had passive read access through an overlooked admin flag. And what I saw made me sit straight up. The contract Mason submitted to the city omitted multiple compliance provision sections that were legally required in municipal bids. There were no worker protection clauses, no minority vendor language, and several financial escalators had been replaced with vague market adjustment phrases that could be interpreted dangerously. Worse still, Mason had signed the draft as the sole approver. No legal review, no compliance oversight, not even a co-signature from a board member. He was setting the company up for a massive liability. I downloaded a copy and ran a comparison report against our standard legal-approved template. The deviations were obvious, bold, and would have been caught by any formal audit. But this draft had been pushed through, outside the usual workflow, filed manually, through a shadow process Mason had devised for expedited innovation, expedited fraud. More like it. I took a breath, printed the full contract trail, and added it to my folder. Before lunch, I called in a personal day for tomorrow. Jake gave me a discreet thumbs up as I passed his desk. At home that evening, I made a list. Real employment contract with digital timestamps, fake consultant status version, Mason's login override logs, IT security validation from Jake, risk analysis of the city contract, metadata trail of unauthorized change. cover letter addressed to the Denver City Development Board. It wasn't about revenge. It was about record, and record was something I had in spades. I sipped my tea, pulled a fresh folder from the drawer, and labeled it Presentation, Civic Contract Review. The signing ceremony with the city was scheduled for Thursday. Mason would be the only company representative present, but I had no intention of letting that deal go through, not without the truth. The only reason people thought I was invisible was because I let them. They saw my cardigans, my sensible shoes, my desk full of sticky notes and labeled folders, and they assumed I was background noise, a relic, a placeholder until the company fully modernized. But what they forgot was that I built the bones of this place. While others gave presentations, I read the fine print. While they talked, I listened. And when you listen long enough, you know exactly where the cracks begin to show. Wednesday morning, I didn't go into the office. I spent the day at the downtown public library, one of my favorite places in the city. It smelled like old paper and lemon cleaner, and the Wi-Fi was strong. I sat in the corner booth near the windows, scanning through municipal procurement laws, with a thermos of peppermint coffee beside me. I wasn't just preparing a confrontation, I was preparing a defense. I had cross-referenced the contract Mason planned to present with the city's own published standards. Standards he had willfully ignored: missing, disclosure of subcontractors, proof of insurance coverage, ADA, compliance clauses, all required, all absent. By early afternoon, I had typed up a 4-page brief outlining the discrepancies, with screenshots, citations, and references to Denver Code 418-144. Once finished, I attached it to an email addressed to the city's compliance officer, personal and confidential. But I didn't hit send, not yet. Instead, I printed the report, along with my documentation, and slid everything into a navy blue presentation folder. I packed it in my tote next to a clean blazer, black slacks, and the only pair of heels I still owned. The signing ceremony was set for 9th. Thursday at the Denver Civic Center. It was invitation only, but I knew how these events worked. There was always a guest registration table, and a guest registration table meant a pen and a badge. I arrived early the next day, dressed sharp but simple. I wore pearl earrings, my hair pinned back, and a soft grey coat that made me look like someone who belonged. I even brought my old company ID badge still active, since no one had officially terminated me. Outside, the air was crisp and dry. Snow sparkled along the sidewalk like powdered sugar. I walked inside, signed the guest log with firm strokes, and stepped into the conference hall just as the lights dimmed, and the city development chair took the stage. Today, she said, we celebrate a transformative step in downtown renewal. Our partnership with Stratwell and Crane represents not just architecture, but opportunity. Polite applause followed. I spotted Mason in the front row, leaning back in his chair like he owned the room. His suit was too sharp, his smile too smooth. He had a leather folio in his lap, no doubt containing the fraudulent contract I had spent the last week dissecting. I stood quietly in the back until the introductions finished. Then I walked down the aisle. People turned to look. I didn't rush. I didn't stumble. I made it all the way to the edge of the stage before Mason saw me. And when he did, his smile faltered. Adele, he whispered, just loud enough for the front row to hear. I held up the navy blue folder. Mr. Telford, I said, voice even. Before you sign anything, I'd like to submit a review of the proposed contract for the city's legal team. He blinked. What is this? I turned to the city compliance officer seated beside the development chair. Would you kindly take a look at this? Ma'am, I believe you'll find serious deviations from standard procurement policy. The woman raised an eyebrow but accepted the folder. Mason reached to intercept, but it was too late. The official had already opened the flap and begun to skim the contents. I'm sorry, Mason said quickly. This employee I'm Adele Hartman, I said, voice steady, 17 years at Stratwell and Crane, former contract compliance officer, and I have proof that what's being presented today has not passed legal review within our firm. The room shifted. You could feel it. Even the cameras paused their panning. The city official handed the folder to her aide and leaned in to murmur to the development chair. A low flurry of whispers rose from the table. Mason looked around, like a man suddenly unsure which way was forward. The aide returned to the podium and cleared her throat. We're going to pause the signing for a few moments to review this documentation. Please remain seated. Mason turned to me, voice low and sharp. What the hell are you doing? I looked him straight in the eye. Correcting an error. One you made, one you thought no one would catch, Because I wear cardigans and bake muffins. He laughed bitterly. You think you're a hero now? No, I said simply. I think I'm the reason this company isn't about to be sued by the city. He scoffed and turned away, but his jaw clenched. Across the room, I saw Julia, the assistant, standing near the wall, eyes wide, hands clasped. She didn't speak, but the look on her face said everything. She'd underestimated me, too. Everyone had. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Finally, the city attorney stepped up to the microphone. Due to irregularities found in the submitted documentation, she said formally, this signing is suspended pending further internal review. Gasps rippled through the audience. Reporters began scribbling. Cameras clicked like firecrackers. Mason tried to speak, but a member of the development board placed a firm hand on his shoulder and shook their head. As people began to leave their seats, a tall, silver-haired man in a pinstripe suit approached me quietly. Mr. Hartman, he asked. Yes, I'm Charles Carmichael, chair of the board at Stratwell and Crane. Would you join me for a conversation today? Mason turned pale when he saw me hand the city attorney a sealed envelope. He didn't say a word at first, just watched from his seat as I approached the podium, steady and silent, placing the envelope down as though it weighed nothing, when really, it carried 17 years of loyalty, 6 months of unpaid labor, and one man's unraveling ego. The city attorney opened it, brow furrowed as she flipped through the documents. Next to her, the chairwoman of the development board whispered something behind her hand. Mason shifted uncomfortably. His jaw was tight. His left thumb tapped nervously against his pen. Mr. Telford, the attorney finally said, voice projecting through the microphone. Would you care to explain the absence of municipal compliance provisions in your submission? I'm sorry, he stammered. She raised a page. The vendor liability clause, the worker safety statement, equal employment assurance. They're all missing. He stood abruptly. That must be an old version. There must have been a mix-up in the documents. I tilted my head. Is that so? Because the version you uploaded to the board's portal matches this one exactly, and it was submitted under your executive credentials, without legal sign-off. A hush fell over the room. The city chair turned to Mason with a look I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of. Were you aware these elements were omitted? Yes, but it was intentional, he blurted. They're redundant. We've streamlined compliance internally. It saves time. Streamlined, the attorney echoed, raising a brow, or bypassed. Mason flushed. Look, we've been under pressure to finalize this deal before year-end. I took initiative. Another official, one I recognized from procurement oversight, stood up. Initiative doesn't include altering municipal legal standards. I could practically see Mason shrinking as each second passed. Reporters scribbled notes. A local TV anchor had their camera pointed directly at him. Julia, his assistant, stood in the corner frozen like a statue. Jake from IT was also present, mouth half open in stunned disbelief. Due to this discovery, the chairwoman said slowly, this event is officially adjourned. The city will conduct a full internal audit. Mr. Telford, you'll be contacted shortly regarding your role in this misrepresentation. Mason turned to me like a drowning man, reaching for the very person who threw him overboard. You set me up, he hissed under his breath. I looked him in the eye. You set yourself up when you assumed no one was watching. He tried to speak again, but Mr. Carmichael, the silver-haired board chair, intervened. That's enough. Mason, in front of everyone. The board escorted Mason to a side hallway. Out of view, some cameras followed, but most eyes stayed on me. And that's when it happened. Someone clapped. Just one person at first, a city rep, I think. Then another. Then a few more. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was enough to make my heart race in a different way. When I finally turned to leave, Mr. Carmichael caught up with me. Miss Hartman, he said quietly, your documents saved this company from a PR disaster and a potential lawsuit. I wasn't trying to be a hero, I replied. I just wanted to protect what we built. He nodded. I'd like to speak with you in private. We're reviewing Mr. Telford's conduct and your employment status. I raised an eyebrow. You mean my lack of status? He gave a sheepish smile. Let's correct that. Shall we? Back at the office that afternoon, the atmosphere had shifted. People who hadn't said a word to me in months were suddenly warm and nervous. I heard whispers by the break room. Is she back on payroll? I thought she retired. No, man, she just nuked the whole civic deal in front of the mayor's rep. Nancy met me in the elevator with wide eyes. Was it true? She whispered. He cut you off the books 6 months ago, I said. Without a word, she shook her head. That man had no shame. When the elevator doors opened, Mason's nameplate was gone from the executive office. Gone, just like that. and in its place, a temporary whiteboard with the words, "Executive access revoked." I walked to my desk and sat down, not to check email, but to breathe. The weight I had been carrying for months, the quiet panic, the gnawing worry finally lifted. And yet, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even satisfied. I was just clear. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reminding them who had kept the foundation stable all these years. Mr. Carmichael appeared at my cubicle later that hour, holding a formal letter. He handed it to me and said, "We'd like you to serve as our new head of compliance and ethical oversight, effective immediately, and your back pay will be restored with interest." I opened the letter, and I smiled not because of the title or the money, but because, for the first time in months, I saw my name printed where it belonged. By the time I returned to my desk, Mason's nameplate was already gone. It was strange, seeing that blank space, like he'd been erased from the company as quickly as he'd tried to erase people like me. The door was shut, the windows frosted over. Someone had already wheeled away his leather chair. The energy in the hallway had shifted lighter, cautious, but alert. Nancy peeked around the corner, carrying a steaming mug. "I heard everything," she whispered, wide-eyed. "The city pulled out, didn't they?" I nodded. "They did. And Mason, suspended." I said, "Indefinitely." She gave a half-smile. "You did what the rest of us never dared." I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady, measured, like someone who had finally laid down a heavy burden. Later that afternoon, I was called to the executive conference room, a place I hadn't stepped into in over 2 years. It smelled the same, faintly of lemon polish, recycled air, and ambition. Mr. Carmichael waited inside, joined by 2 board members and legal counsel. He greeted me with a warm handshake. "Miss Hartman, thank you for coming. I assume this isn't a reprimand," I said lightly. He chuckled. "Far from it. The board had reviewed my documentation, the audit logs, and the HR override trail. Everything lined up. They were stunned not just by Mason's deception, but by my foresight. I had saved the company from massive legal exposure. They said it in those exact words. "I'm not interested in punishment." I told them, "But I am interested in restoration." "What do you mean?" one of them asked. I wasn't the only employee Mason manipulated. I have reviewed at least 4 other cases where long-term staff had their status changed without informed consent. If I'm going to accept a role here, I want them reinstated, with full back pay. They exchanged glances. Mr. Carmichael gave a slow nod. "That's more than fair." "Also," I added, "we need to rebuild trust. That starts with transparency, new policies, contract review protocols, whistleblower protections, and compliance training for every department head starting with executive leadership." It was quiet for a moment. Then the attorney smiled. "You've already drafted this, haven't you?" I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a document labeled Internal Ethics Framework Draft 1.0. They laughed, not mockingly, but in admiration. Mr. Carmichael stood. "Then let's get to work." Back in my cubicle, I found a handwritten note taped to my monitor. It said, "You made me proud today, Jake." I smiled. I hadn't realized how much those small connections mattered. Over the next few days, I worked quietly, steadily meeting with department heads, reviewing documents, restructuring internal access. Julia approached me one afternoon near the printer. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" "For assuming you were just background." I smiled gently. "That's all right. Background tends to hold the whole picture together." Her eyes softened. "If you ever need help reviewing internal flowcharts, I've been learning the back end of the contract platform." I nodded. "Let's sit down next week. I'd like your input." On Friday, Nancy threw a surprise coffee hour for me in the break room. She made lemon bars, and someone brought her sign that read, "Welcome back, Adele." I laughed when I saw it. I didn't know I ever left. I said. She raised her mug, not in spirit, but it's good to have your name back where it belongs. As we shared stories and sipped coffee, I looked around at the faces, some familiar, some new, but all slowly turning toward the same direction. A place where rules weren't just boxes to check, where experience was respected, not buried, where people mattered more than optics. Later that day, Mr. Carmichael handed me a formal title card. Adele Hartman, Head of Compliance and Ethical Oversight. I slipped it into the frame that once held my photo in the lobby. I didn't need the spotlight, just the space to do what was right. It wasn't revenge, it was restoration. By mid-January, Denver was still wrapped in snow, but inside Stratwell and Crane, something had begun to thaw. The culture, the tension, the invisible wall between them and us, all of it was slowly dissolving. Mason's absence wasn't just a change in leadership. It was a reset button, one we hadn't dared hope for. And somehow, I was the one holding the remote. The title on my new business cards read, Head of Compliance and Ethical Oversight. But the real title people whispered when I walked through the halls was different. The one who stopped it, the woman who saved us, the one who knew I didn't need a cape, just a folder. And the truth, we spent the first few weeks reviewing every contract Mason had touched: employees, vendors, external clients. What we uncovered was staggering. At least 6 employees had been covertly reclassified, 3 freelancers had been underpaid, and multiple contracts had been pushed through without proper review. It wasn't just an ethics failure, it was theft, dressed in jargon. But instead of leading with anger, I led with audits. Jake and I worked side by side to build an internal verification system, one that tracked any edits to employee status in real time and sent dual confirmation emails. Julia helped draft a new onboarding protocol. We created clear language, accessible summaries, and most importantly, we made sure that no change could happen in silence again. I initiated a monthly open-door forum. Anyone, from interns to executives, could attend and voice a concern anonymously if needed. We had feedback boxes, cross-departmental check-ins, and something we hadn't had in a long time: trust. There were, of course, growing pains. Some of the executives Mason had brought in were quietly phased out. Others stayed, but had to complete the same training modules we rolled out for entry-level staff. No exceptions, not even for seniority. One afternoon, I received a knock on my door. It was Lewis from accounting, older than me. Quiet, the kind of man who always carried a pen behind his ear and a calculator in his shirt pocket. He sat down, folded his hands, and said, "I didn't fight for you when they erased your contract." "I'm sorry." I paused, not expecting that. "You don't owe me an apology," I said gently. "No," he insisted. "I do. I knew it was wrong, but I was scared, afraid I'd be next." "You weren't wrong to be afraid," I replied, "but I'm glad you're here now." That conversation stayed with me, because Mason hadn't just stolen paychecks, he had stolen people's courage, and I was determined to give it back. The break room felt warmer these days. Nancy brought in her famous coffee cake every Friday. Staff birthdays were remembered again. People stayed a little longer after meetings, shared stories, laughed louder. It was subtle, but it mattered. Julia, once Mason's assistant, had blossomed. She asked hard questions now, challenged assumptions, and once, during a team call, I saw her gently correct a senior architect on a compliance clause. And she did it with confidence I hadn't seen before. At our quarterly luncheon in February, the board publicly recognized our team. I wasn't the only one who received a standing ovation. Jake did too, and Julia, and even Carlos from HR, who, after initially dismissing my concerns, had come forward with archived reports showing Mason's systemic edits. He had been scared too, but he had chosen to do the right thing in the end. After the applause, I gave a short speech, nothing rehearsed, just from the heart. I didn't come back to tear anything down. I told them I came back to rebuild something better, something we can all be proud of. No one should ever feel invisible inside these walls again. The room was quiet, moved. Later that evening, I walked alone through the first-floor hallway, where the old legacy wall had once been. It had been redesigned modern, yes, but with depth. Instead of faceless slogans, the new wall featured real milestones: the downtown library build, the Colfax Community Center, the solar school project in 2014. Beneath each project, the names of the teams were etched in brushed steel. Not just the executives, everyone: draftspersons, contractors, compliance staff. And right in the center, under a spotlight, was my own project photo from 2007, me in a hard hat, clipboard in hand, smiling despite the freezing wind that day. Below it, a single line: "Integrity is what endures." Nancy joined me by the display. "You see that pen you're holding?" she asked, nodding at the gift Julia had given me earlier that week. I looked down, 3 words engraved in silver: "Always check twice." "I think it suits you," Nancy said. I smiled. It suits all of us now. That night, as I prepared to leave, I found an envelope on my desk. Official seal, City of Denver. I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter of civic recognition signed by the mayor. "In appreciation of your unwavering commitment to ethical standards and public trust, for ensuring transparency where others sought shadows." There was a certificate enclosed. I didn't frame it, didn't hang it up. I tucked it into the same drawer that once held fail-safes, because the recognition was nice, but it was never the goal. The real victory was walking through those halls and knowing no one could erase me again. Some people speak loudly to prove their worth. Others work quietly and carry the whole foundation. Adele reminded us that being overlooked doesn't mean being powerless. When integrity meets preparation, even the quietest employee can change the course of a company. This story isn't just about contracts or revenge. It's about courage, about knowing your value when others forget it, and about speaking up at the right time, in the right way. So the next time you dismiss someone for being too quiet or too old, remember, the quiet ones are often the ones watching and waiting with the truth.